Good afternoon. We are pleased that so many of you took time out of your busy schedules to attend today's dedication ceremonies. At this time, we will have an official welcome from Mrs. Joan Heath, the University Librarian.
Governor Richards, members of the Board of Regents, President and Mrs. Supple, members of the President's Cabinet, distinguished donors to the Southwestern Writers Collection, faculty, staff, and students of the university, special guests and friends. On behalf of the university, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to this very special occasion, the dedication of the Southwestern Writers Collection. Today, we celebrate the opening of a unique collection which preserves and provides access to works which represent the literary and cultural history of the Southwest. In just a few short years, an important body of material has been assembled for this growing collection, spanning from the earliest work on Texas, written by Cabeza de Vaca, published in 1555, up to the works of the present day. Today, we also recognize the more than 150 individuals and groups who have made the Southwestern Writers Collection a reality. Most especially, this ceremony allows us to express our gratitude to the writers and artists who have entrusted us with their manuscripts, personal papers, correspondence, mementos, photographs, and paintings. Their contributions not only bring together of our literary history, but also inspire our future writers and artists. Once again, allow me to extend the warmest welcome to each of you on behalf of the university, and thank you for participating in this dedication.
As Joan said, we are delighted to have you here today because your presence reflects your understanding of the importance of the Southwestern Writers Collection, but more will be said about that later on. Today we have many special guests who are joining us for this afternoon's celebration. First, let me introduce you to two members of the Texas State University System Board of Regents, the Honorable William Cunningham and the Honorable Dan Matheson. Will you stand, please, and be recognized? We may also have some former members of the board who are here today. Let me introduce them. The Honorable Edmund Longcope, the Honorable Jack Martin, and the Honorable Kathy Lowry. Will you please stand and be recognized? Let me also present the Chancellor of the Texas State University System, the Honorable Lamar Urbanowski. Let me also introduce to you the Honorable Libby Linebarger, our state representative. Two other special platform guests that you'll be hearing more about later are the founding donors of the Southwestern Writers Collection, Bill and Sally Wittliff. This time, Dick Holland, the curator of the Southwestern Writers Collection, will speak. He will be followed by Dr. Mark Busby, director for the Center of the Study of the Southwest, who will introduce our dedicatory speaker. Dick, if you'll come forward, please.
Thanks, Bob. Last week, we in the library were very honored to have John Graves visit the Southwestern Writers Collection for a day. It was his first visit to the library, and at one point he turned to me and said, "You know, this library has been a dream of Billy's for a long time." The Billy who is Mr. Graves' dreamer is of course, Bill Wittliff, who with his wife Sally founded the Writers Collection in 1986. Bill is a compelling storyteller, and I first heard his dream for a collection of the best of Southwestern writing, photography, art, and book design when the library began to look for a curator for the collection. Bill can take a common object like J. Frank Dobie's pipe, or straw hat, or Russell Lee's camera, mesmerizing story around it. His gift as a teller of a story was made clear to millions of people all over America and now the world in his television adaptation of Lonesome Dove, and will soon be seen again in his new story, Ned Blessing, now being filmed. He mesmerized me with his vision of what his new literary archive could be, and I happily left my niche at the University of Texas Library to come here and help make the writer's collection a reality. I like to think that Bill's masterpiece is the library that we are here to dedicate this afternoon. By the fall of 1986, the first 5 gifts had come to the library. Auspiciously, they were from Wilson Hudson, who was Secretary of the Texas Folklore Society for many years and taught the course on Southwestern Life and Lit at UT that Mr. Dobie had invented. Mike Levy, the publisher of Texas Monthly, who gave a run of his magazine. Bill and Sally Wittliff with their first Dobie gift. Jean Lee, who gave her husband Russell Listen field books. And Larry McMurtry, who gave 16 foreign translations of his work, including movie tie-in versions of Terms of Endearment from Japan and Finland, among other places, all with Shirley MacLaine on the cover, and all showing the international following that a writer from Texas can generate. By the time I came along a year later, there had been 7 more gifts, including important manuscripts from Larry L. King, Bud Shrake, and Stephen Harrigan. The early days here were spent setting up routines, including listing, processing, and cataloging. Invaluable was the help from Bill's office in the person of Connie Todd, who to this day works closely with Bill in preparing the riches that come through his office. Her beautiful work has been admired by everyone from our PhD student at Yale, who has made several trips to San Marcos from New Haven, working on his dissertation about the origins of the American folklore movement, to Rick Bass, who has happily become a frequent visitor to the collection and is making creative use of our J. Frank Dobie file, Grizzly Bears. The collection in 1987 was housed in a glass-walled room on the top floor of the J.C. Cullen building and was barely known to the world at large. This was changed by Lonesome Dove. When the show was first broadcast, we set up a little exhibit on a table across from my desk in the glass-walled room. The only costumes we had at that point were Clara's dress that Miss Houston had donated and P.I.'s stained and torn hat that the actor Tim Scott had given us. We had fewer than a dozen small posters here and there on campus, but the world found us out. San Marcos seems to be full of little children who love Lonesome Dove, and I remember one who visited the exhibit turning to his mother and saying, "Mama, is that Gus's hat?" And her reply, "No, honey, it's P.I.'s." You would have thought that P.I. and Gus were the family's grandfather and favorite uncle. Many visitors beat a path to our door after that, and we had a loyal following for Lonesome Dove that has not diminished. For you Lonesome Dove people, both donors and visitors, there's a sizable exhibit on the book and the television show downstairs on the first floor, where you can pay your respects to Gus, Carl, P.I., Dietz, Lorena, and Clara, and once again press your noses to the glass to read Carrie White's splendid map that summarizes the story. By the time the library moved to this building, the writer's collection had grown to over 200 gifts from over 100 donors. Receiving particular attention was our acquisition in 1989 of a copy of what is considered the earliest Texas book. This was our copy of Cabeza de Vaca's account of his shipwreck off the coast of Galveston in 1527 and his subsequent forced march across central and west Texas. The book was published in Spain in 1555 and is considered the first European book describing travel on the North American continent. There are only 20 or so copies of the book in the world. Bill and Sally Wittliff and the Mugar Foundation of Cambridge, Massachusetts were responsible for the acquisition. If I am known on this campus, it is for 2 things. One is bringing Gus McCrae's body from Bill Wittliff's barn to the library in the back of my Subaru station wagon. And the other is my acting as President Supple's bodyguard during the library's symbolic book move. I'm not sure whose idea the symbolic book move was, but it was terrific. On May 1st, 1990, a human chain was formed between the old library building and the new, and a few books were passed from person to person. Walking the route was President Supple, proudly carrying our Cabeza book. Every 30 feet or so, he would stop and show students or faculty or staff or townspeople the book, repeating the story of Cabeza de Vaca over and over. I thought Rare Books librarianship had lost a good bet in Jerry Supple as I walked alongside him, guarding the little volume. Look inside when our dedication is completed. There is some virtue in concentrating on one thing and doing it well and thoroughly, which is not to say that the story of Southwestern writing is a simple or a one-dimensional story. Looking at our young archive, you can travel with J. Frank Dobie and Henry Nash Smith through Mexico on horseback, share Steve Harrigan's earliest thoughts in the notebooks that he kept before his first drafts of his novels, go dancing with Bill Brammer and Seal Fisher, see Preston Jones's hand-drawn map of his imaginary town, Bradleyville, where Lou Ann Oberlander and the oldest living graduate live, watch Carolyn Osborne persevere through over 40 rejection slips before her story, The Grands, is published by a little magazine in Kentucky, and then is triumphantly selected for inclusion in the 1990 O. Henry Prize volume, and trace the slow process of getting a first novel published by reading the three-way correspondence between Bob Flynn, his agent, and the editors at Knopf in his book North to Yesterday. Our writers deal with the law, politics, racism, sex, divorce, death, country music, jazz music, and football, and that's just Larry L. King. We are accustomed to thinking of Texas writers, in particular, of being from hometowns like Archer City, Kyle, Chillicothe, Putnam, Taft, Gregory, or Blanco. They usually leave these places, and frequently they return, having made names for themselves. Mr. Dobie, as usual, set the pattern when he served as guest lecturer at Cambridge University during World War II. New York City's literary scene in the 1960s had a decided Texas accent with Bud Shrake and Dan Jenkins of Sports Illustrated, and most of all, several of the best and brightest Texas writers holding forth at Harper's Magazine under the editorship of Willie Morris, a Mississippian who had gone to college in Austin and ran the Texas Observer before his trip to New York. Something ever produced by Southwestern writers appeared in Harper's during that period, including Shrake's The Land of the Permanent Wave, McMurtry's Take My Saddle from the Wall, and Larry L. King's The Old Man, one of the best essays in American literature written by a son about his father. Among our donors are 3 winners of the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, history, and cartooning. Other prizes, awards, and recognitions include Peabody Awards, a Writers Guild Award to Bill Wittliff for the Lonesome Dove script, several Emmys, and several that should have been, Grammy Awards, Guggenheims, and other awards too numerous to list. John Graves' Goodbye to a River was a runner-up for the National Book Award the year that the winner was The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. By the 1970s, Bill and Sally Wittliff's Encino Press was going great guns. They published Graves, McMurtry, Shrake, and Larry L. King, and won awards for their design and content. Bill's talent for book design was recognized. Design mentor Carl Herzog, and his gift for discovering talent like the young Barbara Whitehead is what makes the Encino Press memorable to this day. During this decade, Wittliff's generation of writers was beginning to come up against the realities of making a living as writers. Several of them turned to motion picture and television work, with Wittliff's credits soon building up, writing The Black Stallion, then turning his own stories into film, notably Raggedy Man and Barbarossa, his first collaboration with Willie Nelson. The holdings of the Writers' Collection reflect this turn to film, with produced and unproduced screenplays from numerous writers, including Gary Cartwright, Dan Jenkins, Bud Shrake, Sidney and Shelmy Brammer, A.C. Green, and Cormac McCarthy. After the initial Gene Lee gift, the visual arts continued to play an important part in the collection. Gene Lee donated over 200 Russell Lee prints printed and signed by him, and along with the Wittliffs and Jim Bones, gave us a collection of bone black and white and color work. Bill's work as a photographer is present in his literary portraits, his Vaquero photographs, and his charming snapshots from the set of Lonesome Dove. Bill saw to it that we had some of A.V. Bonar's important work. Bill wanted a Kermit Oliver painting for the collection, and we received a beauty from the artist titled The Conversion of St. Paul. I wanted a David Everett piece, and David donated one last week, a beautiful carved mahogany paint pony. I had been aware that Bob Wade, now in New Mexico, had built and placed the giant lizard on top of the Lone Star Cafe in New York City. I had not been aware that Wade was an old college buddy of Bill's until one day his 10-foot-long painting titled 4 minus 2 equals Waco arrived and was soon hung on the wall of my office. A little later, Bob presented us with one of his beautiful cowgirl paintings. Our latest photography gift is from Laura Wilson, 3 prints from her magnificent Watt Matthews book. I want to say something about San Marcos's contribution to the collection. 3 distinguished retired professors, one from A&M, one from UT, and one from Southwest Texas, all live in San Marcos and have become major donors. They are the distinguished Mexico scholar Campbell Pennington, Wilfred Webb from UT, who with his wife Bridget has donated their wonderful library of books on New Mexico, and Bill Poole, whose Historical Atlas of Texas is the all-time best-selling book from the Encino Press. University history represented in the collection is present in other ways as well, including the work of Wimberley writer Bill Porterfield and New Yorker cartoonist Charlie Barsotti, who shared a house on campus in the 1950s. By the time the library moved to this building, the university was quickly acting on the idea of the writers' collection being a major university resource. This became manifest in President Supple's beginning the Center for the Study of the Southwest, whose acting director was a gifted grant writer, Lydia Blanchard. Since she had obtained grants from the Meadows Foundation, the Foundation, and the National Endowment for the Humanities, all based one way or another on the collection. My first foray into the uncharted waters of grant writing was successful in getting a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to plan a traveling exhibit on Southwestern journeys from Cabeza de Vaca to John Graves' trip down the Brazos. The grant-funded Cabeza de Vaca Week was a celebration of the book and of our Hispanic culture. This resulted in a major fundraising effort to establish a permanent fund to purchase Southwestern books by Hispanic writers. We are now 5 years old and have over 300 gifts from, at last count, 168 donors, although this week we have a lot of exciting new prospects. Our goal for this week was to honor our donors. Please notice that the donors' names on the back of the program and on the broadside are all listed in the same type font and the same size. You have all seen other lists where names are arranged according to the size of the donation. Having platinum, silver categories is a smart fundraising strategy, I'm sure, and one that we might eventually embrace. But for our dedication, we wanted to recognize all donors, whether they have presented us with one book or with a legendary archive of material, as did William Broyles with his gifts of Bill Brammer's typescripts to the Gay Place in Fustian days. Our donors can be recognized by the name tags like the one I have on. We approached this event like we would a nice party. We brought out some of our nice things to show you for the occasion. We have done this, but what you will see is, of course, just a fraction of what we have. We can and will in the future fill up all of our cases with the works of Graves or King or Dobie or Brammer or Lonesome Dove. You must all promise to come back. Our next speaker is Mark Busby, who came to this campus 2 months ago from Texas A&M to become the first permanent director of the Center for the Study of the Southwest. Soon after his arrival, Mark did exactly the right thing. He brought a gift to the writers' collection of his own writings on Southwestern literature, which includes work on McMurtry, Preston Jones, and the Oklahoma writer Ralph Ellison. We're glad Mark's here. I hope he likes it as much as I do. Mark will introduce John Graves. Thank you.
I'm here to tell you about a friend of mine, but I want to make it clear that I don't claim too much for myself. Until a few days ago, John Graves wouldn't have known me from 100 of his countrymen he passed along the trail. But he's still a friend of mine, for I've ridden down the river in his canoe sitting next to his dog Passenger. I've listened to him ruminate about septic tanks, goats, tobacco, and the virtues and vices of hardscrabble farming. I've spent much quality time with John Graves because he's the kind of writer beside you who speaks with a clear personal voice so that when you're through with the book, you know you've met a man who knows the light and the dark of his world, and a writer who helps you to see the grays of it too. You know that when he writes of his world, he's been there, and it's true that he's traveled around the world a few times. Born in Fort Worth on August 6, 1920, he explored the Trinity River bottom before it became layered with Coors cans. He studied at Rice University in Houston with George Williams, who would also teach William Goyen and Larry McMurtry. He graduated in 1942 with Phi Beta Kappa honors. Like the others of his generation, he went to war and served as a first lieutenant in the Marines and was wounded at Saipan. After the war, he received a master's degree from Columbia in 1948. He then taught for a couple of years a few miles up the road at the University of Texas, but the wanderlust got him and he traveled around to France and Spain, where he lived for a while, to Tenerife in the Canary Islands, and then to Mexico before he came back to his blood's country in 1957 and joined the faculty at TCU. After taking a canoe trip down the Brazos River in the fall of 1957, Graves wrote Goodbye to a River, published in 1960, and in that year, bought the first part of his land near Glenrose. Working that land led to his book about it, Hard Scrabble, published in 1974. His third book, Notes from a Limestone Ledge, continues his ruminations on his home place and includes essays written over a period of time for Texas Monthly magazine. Besides these three major books, John Graves has written on conservation for the Sierra Club and the Water Hustlers, 1971, and he has published a number of other works, short stories and articles for The Atlantic, American Heritage, Esquire, and The New Yorker. Through all of his writing, John Graves demonstrates how a writer with a clear sense of purpose, a respect for the bountiful world, an understanding of the depth of simplicity, and a strong grip on language can step forth and move people in ways that last. I've always been struck by the subtle persuasion of Goodbye to a River. It's the same rhetorical stance that Shakespeare's Mark Antony takes in his famous eulogy for Caesar, saying that he comes just to bury Caesar and not to praise him, and then he sets about to move his audience in his subtle praise. That's what John Graves does with his piece of the Brazos, and it is profound persuasion. It's the work of a masterful writer who has now attained the unofficial rank of the Dean of Texas Letters. I give you John Graves.
I have a rather firm belief that writers ought to be read and not seen. Last week, when I was visiting the collection for the first time, I was privileged to do some browsing among documents there, being an inveterate browser of that sort. And one paper that seized my attention was a letter sent to a Texas professor in 1926 by Andy Adams, author of The Log of a Cowboy. Because something the old trail writer said in it made him seem like my blood brother. Writing from his home in Colorado, after some comments about the cattle brands decorating the newly built Garrison Hall at the University of Texas, Adams concluded with this statement: I was invited to attend the dedication hall, but was afraid someone might expect me to make a speech, and I would rather be shot at the distance of 10 steps than to face an audience. Such skittishness about public appearances and public utterance is not too uncommon a quirk among cowboys, writers, and other unsocial types. I confess to sharing it in full. In fact, having now reached a relatively austere age when stubborn eccentricity is tolerated a bit better than it is in younger men, I resolved a couple of years ago that henceforth I wasn't going to take on any more public speaking than I could possibly get out of. Yet here I stand before you, bouncing my voice off your eardrums, laying claim to your attention. There are 2 or 3 good reasons. Abdication of principle on my part. Chief among them, I guess, is my long-standing close friendship with a devilishly persuasive fellow named Bill Wittliff, who is passionate about this collection and has been the prime moving spirit behind its establishment, as Dick and the others have already said. They've already said several things I was going to say. Another reason is that I myself believe strongly in the project and its purposes. And still another is that you who are listening to me have attested by the fact of your presence here on this day that you believe in the project too. In effect, we have a sort of family connection based on shared belief. And family members are easier to talk to than strangers. Most of them are, anyway. During time, or at least during the latter half of it that I've spent back at home in this region where I was born and reared, I've been aware of and have occasionally contributed to conversation, argument, oratory, and writing on the topic of Texas and Southwestern literature. True, this isn't a subject that the general population gets highly excited about, but it's one that I imagine has touched the interest of just about everyone in this audience. I have no intention of tackling here the large and oft-debated question of why and how this region continues to see itself as distinctive in an age that lurches toward sameness everywhere. But by and large, the region does thus view itself. And if this all too often leads to jingoism, it's fading. Yeah. If this all too often leads to jingoism, prevention, narrow-mindedness, boastfulness, and other regrettable attitudes, it can also lead to more pleasant things, such as the belief or illusion or conviction or whatever it is that we do have a literature of our own. For whatever Southwestern literature's virtues and lacks may be, whatever its degree of acceptance in the wider world of letters of America and the world, it is our literature insofar as we feel ourselves to be Texans and Southwesterners, just as the work of Shakespeare and Milton and Tolstoy and Faulkner and a host of others belongs to us as conscious inheritors of Western civilization. These bodies of writing that belong to us play a part in shaping us as people. At least they do if they deserve the name literature. Judged by this criterion, Texas and Southwestern branch of the world of letters has pretty much proven itself. Certainly it did so in terms of my own generation, for whom the work of the old frontier chroniclers and of Dobie, Webb, Betty Check, Catherine Ann Porter, and the rest has imbued our surroundings with resonance. These writers have heightened our awareness of the Southwest land and people. Woods, hills, mountains, prairies, deserts, the bays and islands along the Gulf Coast, vegetation, geological phenomena, beasts and birds, battles, Indian tribes, other historic matters, towns, accents, dialects, myths, livelihoods, skills, pastimes, attitudes, and local ways. Their books help us to sense the spirit and feel of our region and of our people, past and present, and thereby help us to know, in part, who and what we ourselves. And the old books seem to have been doing the same thing for succeeding generations, even in the face of potent national and worldwide pressures toward conformity and the obliteration of regional myths and meanings. I'm not well enough versed in the current publishing scene to cite titles and numbers, but I'm aware that many of the more useful earlier books relating to the Southwest, which were quite hard to get hold of when I was younger, at about the time, for instance, that I was working on that river book, they're now in print again. And they stay in print because they're being bought and read. I would guess that a certain number of the folks who still look on our region and its culture as distinctive must feel an obligation to learn what these things consist of. I hope so. Without knowledge, the sense of distinctiveness is a shaky proposition in a time like ours. It's still growing, this body of expression, flavored and textured by the natural framework and history and social circumstances of our part of the world. It is bringing forth new viewpoints on the region's past and the remnants of that past. It is examining urban life in an urban time. And it is being enhanced by the work of people from ethnic groups whose ways once either went largely unrecorded or were interpreted by Anglo-outsiders. When we read the work of writers like, just for instance, Rolando Hinojosa Smith or Americo Paredes or Larry McMurtry, we're compelled to modify in some degree our view of ourselves and the world around us. We're broadened. Our literature is thus still performing the functions of us as people and furnishing us with resonance. Sometimes furnishing us with dissonance also. But that's part of the whole. A very large part sometimes, and it used to be largely ignored. If our regional literature matters in terms like those, and I believe it does, Certainly it merits being studied coherently, as it is being studied now in many college courses. And it merits a home, a shrine, if you will, like the one being dedicated here today. A center not only of study, but of feeling, where the writings that constitute the literature can be assembled, and when possible the manuscripts from which they were printed, as well as letters, diaries, journals, and other scribblings from the people who wrote the books and stories and essays and such, and artifacts of other kinds that have association with those people. As an aside, the appeal of such acts is a curious thing to me. What ought to matter about writers is writing, period. Yet there's an undeniable glow to be derived from seeing articles used daily by figures like Keats or Faulkner, or for us as Southwesterners, the briar pipe and Panama hat of Mr. J. Frank Dobie. Individual living writers looking at their own artifacts may feel a different sort of glow at times. In personal terms, for instance, I don't have any idea what emotions, if any, my old canoe paddle on display in there will arouse in others. But what it chiefly arouses in me, aside from a few recollections, is disgust that I let a useful tool lie out for 3 or 4 years among willows beside a stock pond, where it was rotted by weather and fractured by the hooves of black Angus. It's testimony to one of my basic flaws, a slavishness about personal possession. I won't attempt to comment on what testimony is offered by another item on display in the collection, my friend Rick Bass's demolished electric typewriter, which he hurled against a stone fireplace because of its insistence on typing several S's when he only wanted one. He says it still hums if you plug it in, though it doesn't look as if it would. The Southwestern Writers Collection, as it stands, and as a couple of the other speakers noted, is not a finished thing. In one sense, it never can be. Not as long as people in our part of the world keep on writing books, poems, stories, articles, songs, essays, plays, film scripts, and so on. Even in terms of all the writing that Southwesterners have done thus far, it has large gaps, which will shrink as time and money and the availability of specific items permit them to be filled. What is in the collection now is a foundation for what will be built, a seed bed. It is future home territory for our literature and its mementos and paraphernalia. But that phrase, what is in the collection now, covers quite a lot of material. It includes, as has been noted again, the basic beginning, the earliest book ever published about this region, the account of tough and durable Cabeza de Vaca, of his extended wanderings through the Southwest. The latter end of things, it includes scripts and diverse picturesque objects, as you've also been told, associated with Bill Wittliff's recent and much acclaimed television series based on the McMurtry novel Lonesome Dove. And in between these ancient and contemporary pieces of work are enough books and papers to preoccupy a devotee for months on happy months. In time there will be enough to preoccupy him or her for years on happy years. As a writer myself, and in view of the project's name, the Southwestern Writers Collection, I've been dwelling here mainly on writing. But the collection has a fine admixture of other aesthetic efforts, as you will see, from the superb book designs of Carl Herzog and the Holmans and others, to photographs and paintings and the song manuscripts of Willie Nelson. These things belong in this room also. Elsewhere, collections exist whose focus is Western literature, or on individual Southwestern writers, or on groups of them. But I know of none with the scope and spirit that this one seeks to attain. That it is already well started toward that attainment, and that it has been provided with such a fit and handsome home in which to consolidate and grow, bears testament to vision and taste and hard work from Bill Wittliff and Dick Holland and a number of other people, to understanding and warm cooperation from the faculty and administration of this university, and to generosity from individual donors whose numbers, as you've heard, are mounting higher and higher. All these can, and I think do, feel strong, honest pride in the enterprise. I myself feel pride for having a small part in its launching. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graves, for those very special words. At this time, the president of Southwest Texas State University, Dr. Jerome Supple, will make a special presentation. Jerry?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Joan, for those comments. Your very presence here is a validation of the good works in that collection. On these doors behind me lie seeds and roots and fruits and tools. It may sound like a farm, and I guess in a certain way it is. It's the kind of farm that captures the cultural and literary roots of a region. It stores the fruits of hundreds of writers and photographers and screen artists. It offers the seeds for future writers and the tools to help them. Bill Wittliff says that that's been a plan of his for years, to set up a place to inspire young men and women with an itch to write and not yet the courage. And the need for such a collection was obvious to him. We need to know where we come from, he said. Bill was an early convert to his life's work. After reading J. Frank Dobie's Old-Time Tales of Texas when he was 12, he decided that storytelling was his own future. He gave in to a yearning to books by Southwestern writers in 1963 when he set up the Encino Press in his garage with $300 in poker winnings. He ran the press at nights, I guess when he wasn't playing poker, and on weekends while Sally kept the office and the books. And he began writing professionally himself when he was in his 30s. Thaddeus Rose and Eddie, a 1978 TV movie, was his first script to be produced. Then came The Black Stallion, Honeysuckle Rose, Raggedy Man, Red-Headed Stranger, and Country. In 1986, he began an arduous task of converting Lonesome Dove to the television screen and watched that project become lovingly embraced by the American public in 1989. He's now filming, as you well know, a new series called Ned Blessing, filming near Austin, being produced by Texans. We expect to see that on CBS Spring. Bill is a wonderful photographer, writer, movie producer, director, and book designer. He does a lot of things well. But first of all, he's a Texan and a Southwesterner. He doesn't try to explain his love for his native state. He says, it's my place. Simple as that. He's intent on preserving its heritage in a special place. So in 1986, the Wittliffs approached Southwest Texas with the idea, and together we set up the Southwestern Writers Collection. The collection is doing what Bill hoped it would, inspire future writers as the Dobie book inspired him. Author Stephen Harrigan says, I was working in ignorance when I started out. I didn't know any writers. If I had wandered into a room like this, I would have been enchanted, just to see that there were other people trying the same things that I wanted to do. The Wittliffs have established a trade that belongs to the Southwest, to Texas, and we are proud to say to Southwest Texas. Bill and Sally, we thank you for bringing this magnificent archive and educational tool to Southwest Texas. And to show our appreciation today, we want to present to you the highest honor the President of Southwest Texas can give for outstanding contributions to our mission and our future. Would you please accept from Southwest Texas State University our President's Excellence Award?
Oh.
This is not going to be a speech. I put it in my contract when we started, seriously. But I do want to remark on one thing. Years ago when I was a child, my mother ran the telephone office in Edna, Texas. And there was a man in that town named Tips Westhoff who ran the hardware. And he used to give me old boards and nails and so on and told me stories. One of the stories he told me was of an escaped slave woman who lived in the river bottom, the Navitat river bottoms. And the men around there for years tried to catch her and never could. But they did find her tracks. And for a time, they found the tracks of a small child with her tracks. And then after a while, the small tracks vanished. And I guess I must have been 6 or 7, and I was so hugely and deeply moved by that story that it became then and is a part of me. 6 or 7 years after that, when I think I was 13 or so, an aunt who worked in the book department of Joske's in Houston sent me a copy of J. Frank Dobie's Old Time Tales of Texas. And in that book was a story called The Wild Woman of the Navitat, which was the story that I had first heard as an oral tradition. Well, it just set me afire. I had never realized that books, writing, literature could spring from the very piece of ground that I had lived on or was living on. And I guess whatever participation Sally and I have had in this thing really comes from that moment. So it was kind of Dobie, I think, passing through me to this. I got the itch then. I certainly didn't have the courage to try to write. It wasn't until I was 30, I guess, that I ever got a single good sentence. But the spark came from there. My hope for this thing, and Sally's hope for this thing, is that with everybody else's help, that spark keeps passing on down. And I want to thank everybody here at Southwest Texas and all of you who've given of your time, your artifacts, your manuscripts, your books, and given of your heart. Thank you most kindly.
Some Hollywood producers used to tell Bill it's ridiculous to think you can live in a place like Texas movies. Bill showed them you can not only write movies in Texas, but you can film them here. Our next speaker's been spreading the same word. She recently returned from California, where she told the movie people what Texas has to offer. She's spreading all kinds of good words about Texas, in the state as well as out of it. She tells Texans that we can overcome the current fiscal crisis by using our resources wisely. She tells us that our hard work, our common sense, and our energy can restore the state's vitality. She tells us how all of our citizens can contribute to making Texas great again, the state that leads the way in addressing our country's future. She's always believed in the participation of all citizens. She's been active in the community all of her professional life, first as a public school teacher, then as an elected official. She ran campaigns for others before running her own. As county commissioner and state treasurer, then launched her campaign for the top seat in state government. From her childhood in Waco to the governor's mansion, Ann Richards, like Bill Wittliff, has been influenced by Texas stories, the legends, the heritage, the characters that make Texas bigger than life. That background helps her belief in a bright future for the state of Texas. and she's working to ensure all of us a future that lives up to those stories. It's quite fitting then that such a committed public official helps us dedicate our Southwestern Writers Collection. Would you please join me in welcoming Governor Ann Richards.
Thank you very much, President Supple, Sally and Bill, John, distinguished guests, and all of you in the audience. I didn't expect to find myself feeling emotional today, even though it's an exciting day for all of us and for Southwest writing and Texas history. When I walked in and saw my friend Jean Lee, I felt really quite overcome with the realization that I have at one time or another in my life met and known a number of the people who are contributors to this collection. I've sat at Jean and Russ's feet in the old days and some of the new days, saw Bedichek and Webb and Dobie sprawled on the rocks at Broughton Springs, have had many good times with Larry King and Billy Brammer, listened to Larry McMurtry spout forth at Schultz Garden, spent a lot of enjoyable time in the company of Gary Cartwright, Bud Shrake. I could go on for a long time, but we have made a sort of a common pact that I won't tell what I know about them if they won't tell what they know about me. But as we were sitting here, as I was sitting here and listening, I thought of one story that I felt that I really must share with you. It was a river trip, John, down the Rio Grande River. I have forgotten which canyon, most likely Boquillas or Mariscal. And there were a number of vagabonds and renegades who were on that trip. In one boat was Willie Morris. Willie was having all of his success as the editor of Harper's Magazine, and he was in the canoe with a man named Neil Caldwell. Neil is now a district judge in Angleton, Texas. I thought of this particular story because I just spent last week riding the Rio Grande again, about 20 feet above normal, and experiencing that wonderful country once again. But anyway, Willie Morris and some of the fellows on the trip were inexperienced paddlers. And you really don't get on the Rio Grande River unless you have some notion of what you were doing. But we felt that Neil was skillful enough that he could get Willie through almost anything, and he did. But we camped out one night on the river, and the next morning I was going down to the water's edge, and there was Willie Moore with a collapsible toothbrush, performing his morning cleansing in the Rio Grande River. And I said, my God, Willie, don't you realize that all the effluent of Mexico and a number of houses that should go unmentioned is coming directly into this river, and you are putting it in your mouth? And Willie was really horrified at the lack of the pristine nature of the outdoors. And I wanted to tell you that story so that you would know that we must not deify these people because they are fallible. Unlike John Graves, I make a lot of speeches. But I must say that the speaking of words at a convocation for some of the best writers in the world is an awesome prospect, especially when many of those writers are your cherished and admired friends. if you take from a shelf a long-worn and much-loved copy of a book like Goodbye to a River, or The Gay Place, or Blessed McGill, you explore familiar territory. And as an older and more experienced, if not wiser Texan, you're really stunned with the truth of what you read, with the power of the letters and the syllables and the images that provoke recognition, make you lapse into reverie, that make you warm with memory. You read the words written by people who are often contemporaries, and you know from firsthand observation that they are plainly mortal. And you realize that they possess some peculiar clairvoyance that materializes in ink. In Blessed McGill, Bud Shrake wrote, "More enters a man's head than he perceives. So we do things that amaze ourselves." Well, the artists who are a part of this collection have shared the same Southwest with us, but somehow more of it has entered their heads and come back to us in ways that amaze years after the work is done. Whether it is the photographs of Russell Lee, the plays of Preston Jones, the screenplays of Billy Wittliff, or the novels of Larry McMurtry, the characteristic that unites these artists is the ability to connect a place and the people who draw life from it. When our friend John Graves writes about the Brazos, he writes about a whole river, a river that weaves itself into the lives along its banks. And when Billy Lee Brammer wrote about Arthur Fenstermaker, he wrote about a politician who was so much a part of Texas that we cannot imagine one existing without the other. When he describes the land in Texas as barbarously large and final, well, you know he could just as well be describing Governor Fenstermaker. And what we sense in all this work is that we in the Southwest are bound to what the Spanish language calls querencia, a place of such deep meaning and strong fealty that neither time nor distance can separate us from it. If we recognize ourselves in the works of this collection, it is because we are there. J. Frank Dobie said, "It seems to me that other people living in the Southwest will lead fuller and richer lives if they become aware of what it holds." The men and women whose work is represented here heighten that awareness and show us a truth about ourselves that we might have missed without their amazing ability, as Bud said, to know more than we perceive. These artists remind us that of who we are and where we come from, and that it is a source of pride and limitless imagination. We are indebted to Bill Wittliff for the wisdom to know that this extraordinary talent should be collected in one place, to inspire young talent, to offer a center for research, and to give the world a chance to know us better than we know ourselves. People ask me all the time, what is it about you people from Texas? What is it? And I usually answer that I think it's in the water. But the more likely truth is that it is in the writers that tell our story. It is a privilege here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor Richards. We are honored by your presence. At this time, I would like to invite Governor Richards and all of the platform guests to go to the area immediately behind me for the cutting of the ceremonial ribbon that will officially open the Southwestern Writers Collection. And while they are preparing for that ceremony, let me take this opportunity on behalf of Southwest Texas State University to express our appreciation to all of you for taking time to attend this dedication. I know you will agree with me and with the remarks made here today that we are most fortunate to have this collection and those who support it. We're pleased that it's here today and that it will be here in the future to serve and inspire students and the community. Following the ribbon cutting, we hope that all of you will join us at the reception, and we invite you to tour exhibits in this area and those that are on the first floor. And if you haven't had time to sign the guest book, we hope you'll do that before you leave as well. We will now conclude our ceremony with the formal ribbon cutting.
I want you to get mine so you get your legacy on mine. I kept thinking all night last night that the pictures are going to be terrible. You're supposed to hold on to it. You too. Are you ready?
No, come on in. Whenever you are.
All right. Oh, what an honor. Thank you. Well, I'm so pleased to meet you. We're really excited about this, you know. I am too. We got a lot riding on you. Just, how are you? Thanks. Hey, how are you? Rose, aren't you a pretty young woman? I'm so pleased to meet you. I'm glad you're here on this important day.